Africa Day, May 25, 2023. Greetings to you all van Africa, the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, on this Africa Day, May 25, 23, when we celebrate 60 years of the formation of the Organization of Africa Unity, now African Union, formed on 23 May 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Africa, by the leaders from all of Africa and leaders from the diaspora. I'm very grateful to Tanyara's initiatives who have provided me with this opportunity to discuss with you and also share some ideas on what the Africa Day should mean to all the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. From 1963, May 25 has been celebrated as the Africa Unity Day by all the peoples of Africa following the formation of the OAU, now the AU, and thereafter May 25 was declared the Africa Day to be observed and celebrated by all the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. They celebrate the formation of the OAU-AU as the birth of an organization formed specifically to champion the cause of the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. The formation of the OAU-AU was a product of the movement for Pan-Africanism started by the peoples of Africa in the diaspora at the beginning of the 20th century, when they held in 1900 or 1901 the first conference for the movement for Pan-Africanism in Paris, France, organized by luminaries, among them Dr. W.E. Du Bois. The second conference of the movement for Pan-Africanism was held in 1945 in Manchester, UK, when leaders from the diaspora and Africa met to map out the road to freedom for the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. It has become to be known as the 1945 Manchester Conference for the Movement for Pan-Africanism. Among the leaders who attended the conference from the West Indies and the Americas were Dr. W.E. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Dr. Henry Sylvester Williams, Cyril R. Lewis James, George Padmore, and many others. And from Africa were the likes of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah from the Gold Coast, now Ghana, Dr. Hastings Banda from the British Protectorate of Nyasaland, now Malawi, Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, Seretse Khama from the British Protectorate of Bechuanaland, now Botswana, and many others. The third conference for the movement for Pan-Africanism was All the People's Africa People's Conference, held in 1957-1958 in Accra, Gold Coast, now Ghana, when the peoples of Africa from both independent political states and independent territories in Africa attended. At this conference, among the notable leaders were Sékou Touré of Guinea, Modibo Keïta of Mali, Patrice Lumumba from the Belgian Congo, now DRC, Mohamed Bembela from Nigeria, Julius Nyerere from Tanganyika, Oliver Tambo, Robert Sobukwe from South Africa, John Nkomo from Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, among many others, and from the West Indies and the Americas, among them were George Padmore, Malcolm X, among many others. The conference set in motion the protest movements throughout Africa, demanding one man, one vote, as a result of which many colonies got political independence as from 1960 and thereafter. The fourth conference for the movement for Pan-Africanism was in May 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, when on May 23rd they formed the Organization of African Unity, OAU, now African Union, AU, and thereafter declared May 25 as the Africa Unity Day or Africa Day. That has been celebrated every year for the past 60 years today by all the peoples of Africa, in Africa and in the diaspora. At that conference, all the leaders of the peoples of Africa from North, East, West, Southern Africa, and from the diaspora were there. From Africa, among them were Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, who hosted the conference, King Hassan of Morocco, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Sekou Toure of Guinea, Julius Nyerere of Tanganyika, among many others, and leaders from the diaspora. Given that crude and brief history of the movement for Pan-Africanism leading to the formation of the AU in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia on May 23, 1963, hopefully you can appreciate why the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, celebrate the formation of the OAU and May 25 as Africa Day, as some peoples of Africa in the diaspora had suffered for 7 centuries, if not more, under slavery, and for nearly 100 years all the people territories of Africa had been under European imperial colonial rule with cultural and religious imperialism. The formation of OAU was the birth of an organization to protect the interests of the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, on the World Forum. But what really should the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, celebrate on Africa Day? As in Africa, there is a rampant social and political chaos, with wars being fought in many political states, like recently in Ethiopia, Sudan, Cameroon, social unrest in the DRC, Nigeria, Mozambique, xenophobia in South Africa, etc., etc. And in the diaspora, the peoples of Africa continue to suffer under the legacy of slavery, and people continue to be shot and killed like animals in the towns and the cities of USA, Europe, as was evidenced by the killing of George Floyd in America. That led to the movement of Black Lives Matter in many towns and cities in America and Europe. However, before looking at that, at why that situation in that is like that, let us look at some facts why the peoples of Africa need to celebrate the Africa Day on May 25 every year. The peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, celebrate the formation of the OAU as it was. 1. The birth of an organization to champion the cause of the peoples of Africa and in the diaspora. Some peoples of Africa had suffered under slavery for many centuries, and nearly all of Africa had been colonized and subjected to European imperialism for nearly 100 years, following the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, without any organization to protect them. 2. The formation of the OAU was followed by the declaration that Africa and its islands around it as one entity. The oneness of Africa and its islands was made very clear to the world. As such, the peoples of Africa are one, with the equality of all its peoples as human beings, without regard to race, color, or religion. There is only one race for all human beings, that is, the human race. In other words, it was a declaration of Hunu, Ubuntu, Untu, Utu. Such a declaration is no parallel in this world, as it is only under Hunu, Ubuntu, Untu, Utu that every human life is sacred. If international organizations like the UN and its agencies were formed under principles of love, truth, and justice for all human beings, this world would be a suitable environment for the human race on earth. 3. The OAU set up the Liberation Committee to assist the liberation movements with military supplies and materials and moral support to enable them to liberate themselves from colonial and foreign settlers' rule, which was achieved in 1994 when democratic elections were held in South Africa, which ended foreign settlers' rule of apartheid in that country. 4. There are now 55 political states in Africa with the political authority and military power, which through the AU can now take political decisions which can change the situation for the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora in this world. 6. Below AU, there are now regional economic organizations to spearhead economic developments in each region. Among them are East Africa Economic Community, ECA, Economic Community of West Africa, ECOWAS, Southern Africa Development Committee, SADC, Preferential Trade Area, PTA, which organizations can marshal natural resources in the region for economic development. 6. Last but not least, the setting up of May 25 as Africa Day, be observed each year, is a cause for celebration by the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, as it provides a window for review to see if the unity process is on course to uniting the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. From such reviews, remedial actions will be taken if people demand that changes be made. As such, Africa Day is a day for celebration by all the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. Now, it is 60 years today after the AU was formed. Even though uniting the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora, is a process and not an event, what has the OAU done and not done during the last 60 years today? It is unfortunate that a lot has not been done to meet the aspirations for unity of the peoples of Africa, both in Africa and in the diaspora. If these 60 years are any guide to go by. In Africa, the indigenous communities of village, culture, language, or ethnicity have remained divided by the colonial boundaries drawn on policies of divide and rule following the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 in the scramble for Africa. Those colonial borders were never drawn as future boundaries of political states of Africa, and should have long been reviewed, not phased out altogether, as keeping them means continuing with the same policies of divide and rule of the indigenous communities devised by the colonial powers with their policies of divide and rule. The colonial powers maintained social and political orders through repression by armed forces, the police and prisons in those colonies where indigenous communities were divided by the colonial borders. As a result of those divisive colonial boundaries, there is social and political chaos in most political states of Africa, which the AU seems unable to resolve. Hence, social and political instability has become the norm, as the indigenous rulers cannot govern like the foreign colonizers. Without social and political stability, there will be no meaningful political and economic development. The peoples of Africa should put pressure on the political states to take decisions through the AU to revise, if not remove, the colonial boundaries altogether and come up with the economically viable administrative provinces, which cannot be more than 6 for all of Africa and its islands, with the 7th province being made up of overseas territories grouped into zones. As currently structured, the AU is not in a position to solve social and political problems in the political states in Africa or provide defense for the peoples of Africa, as was evidenced by its failure to come to the assistance of Libya when it came under attack by NATO, which killed Muammar Gaddafi, the then president of Libya, a member of state of the AU. There is no talk of creating a single army yet for the defense of Africa and all its territories, as was suggested by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah during the time of the formation of the OAU. Nor is there any move to form a central bank for Africa with its own Afro currency to facilitate inter-Africa trade and the free movement of goods and people. Hope is with you, the young peoples of Africa, to agitate for change in the political states of Africa. With the assistance of modern technologies, the transitional leaders in the political states in Africa can be forced to act in accordance with the wishes of the people, as was done in the Middle East during the Arab Spring. Time is not on our side. Come 2063, the AU will not have achieved much if what it has done in the past 60 years is any guide to go by. Other people using modern technologies by that time have wiped us out from planet Earth through scientific projects of depopulation which targeted the peoples of Africa using weaponized DNA, genetically modified foods and seeds, and vaccinations like the recent COVID-19 to eliminate us as a race, like pesticides eliminate weeds leaving plants unaffected in fields. They've already been doing so through the introduction of diseases like HIV, AIDS, and Ebola. Though we may not be aware of it, some foreign people are at war with us as they need to get unimpeded access to our natural resources and minerals. The competition has now been joined by many others, by the Indians, Chinese, and Russians, who need our minerals for the manufacturing of the modern electronic technologies using rare earth minerals and lithium, which is also now in great demand. The AU should be pushed to wake up and do what it was formed to do. The AU Secretariat and the heads of state should take decisions which can change our condition in this world if we are to survive as other people in this world. We don't need to wait for 2063 for change. We need change now. Thank you.